Excellent. Apologies for the technical glitches. Thank you, everyone. I'm Mark Simon from Sports Info Solutions here with Brian Reiff, and we're glad to be bringing you this presentation, The Fielding Bible, Repositioning Defensive Run Saved. The work that has been done here is the product of many people, whether it's the video scouts that are tracking games for us at our offices in Copley, Pennsylvania, all the way up top to the owner of the company, John Dewan. I am a member, and Brian is a member of the research and development team at Sports Info Solutions, and this is the result of years of research. You have probably seen some of the presentations that we've done in the past on the progress that we've made at past SABR Analytics conferences, and we are here to bring you what is, I guess, the next step in that we feel very good about. So, Brian, you can take it away.
All right, thank you, Mark. So, summarize what we're going to do before we actually get into it. As Mark kind of mentioned, we just recently released this new Fielding Bible. And in it, we kind of detail some of our recent improvements to our flagship defensive run saved metric. And so what I'm going to do today, what we're going to do today, is explain that new system, the benefits of it, the methodology of it, the motivations behind it, stuff like that. And obviously, because it's not a straightforward thing necessarily, it's a little more complex. So we'll have some video examples as well to kind of reinforce the points. Before I get started with the new updates, I wanted to kind of just give a quick refresher of defensive analytics in general and defensive run saved in particular. So defensive analytics have been around for a long time, back to the 1800s even, when fielding percentage was being incorporating put out assists and errors, trying to figure out how much value a player's defense was worth. Later on in the 1900s, we had things like range factor and those related metrics. And then more recently, in the early 2000s, defensive run saved was released utilizing this kind of plus-minus approach. And that plus-minus approach, instead of just saying how many balls did the fielder get and how many did he have an error on, things like that, instead it rates each play's difficulty and says he was expected to make this play 70% of the time. If he did, he would get 0.3 credit. He would get 1 minus 0.7 credit. If he didn't, he would get minus 0.7. And that way we can kind of account for the difficulty of the play, and then reward fielders or debit them fairly. This is a similar approach used by other metrics that you're probably aware of. Ultimate zone rating and StatCast outs above average do similar things. But obviously, we're going to be talking about defensive run saved today. So in particular, defensive run saved is actually made up of several different components, about 9 or 10, depending on how you specify, how you split up things. The main one was called the range and positioning run save component. That's the one that accounts for saying a ball was hit into play at this with this difficulty. Did you field it or not? Of course, there are actually several others, such as bunt run saved, double play run saved, strike zone run saved, which is our catcher framing metric, things like that. But as I said, we're focusing on this main one. Just I was trying to avoid some confusion there. So this range and positioning run saved, as it was formerly called, is now being replaced by what we call the PART system. So what is the PART system? PART's an acronym, stands for positioning, air balls, range, and throwing. And there are several benefits to this new system. One of them, one of the main ones is the fact that it allows us to evaluate more plays. A little bit of an echo there.
Sorry.
It allows us to evaluate more plays than we used to. So in the old system, plays in which the defense was shifted, we weren't able to, we were excluding those plays from our analysis because we didn't know where the fielders were standing, and then some players would be receiving inordinate amounts of credit given the fact that they were standing on parts of the field that no other fielders at their position would be standing at. In the new system, we actually, BIS video scouts chart the position of infielders on every ground ball and short line drive. So now we know where they were standing, and we can include those plays back in our analysis, which, as I'll explain later, is actually quite a bit of plays. As I said, BIS video scouts chart this data. All the data used for this metric, all this data used for this metric is exclusively BIS. The data goes back to 2013. So even though this update was only released during this past offseason, we actually have it retroactively back to 2013. You can see it on sites. Fangraphs and Baseball Reference, I believe, have these data these data points up by now. It's also on fieldingbible.com, has a lot of additional details that you might not be able to get at those sites. And then the other advantage is that, as the name would suggest, fielder defense is now being split up into components. So on every ground ball and short line drive, we're splitting up a fielder's contributions on defense into positioning, range, and throwing. So how do we do that? It's not actually that complicated, even though the slide may or may not seem a little complicated. As I mentioned formerly, the plus-minus approach kind of has an expected out rate, and then it decides whether you made the play or not, and then determines how much credit to give you based on that. Here, there's instead of one expected out rate, there are 3 expected out rates. So I'll kind of explain how it works with positioning play saved. You can see positioning play saved is equal to the difference between expected out rate B and expected out rate A, which you can see what each one is at the top. So A is just how likely was the ball to be an out, just given the ball and play characteristics, such as how hard it was hit, at what trajectory it was hit, what spray angle it was at, among other things. And then expected out rate B is all of that data, plus you include where the fielder or fielders were positioned on the play and how likely was the play being made given all that info. And then when you take the difference between those 2 out rates, you get how much credit the team saved or lost with its positioning, or the player saved or lost with its positioning. Similar things are done with range and throwing play saved. There's also an out rate C that those incorporate, which is the expected out rate after the ball is fielded. So then you just take the difference between those 2 different out rates for each one, and you get the play saved contribution. You'll notice air play saved isn't really on there. As I said, this is only for ground balls and short line drives. Air play saved is a separate calculation, and it's kind of just its own thing. So it's all well and good that we're able to do this, but unless we can actually get value out of it, it's not really that useful. So what we've run several analyses on it, done a lot of research, and one of the striking things we found was how the reliability year over year of each of these components. So if you look at that chart on the right, you see each of the positioning, range, and throwing, the year-to-year correlation for those metrics for players who both switched teams in a given year or in the second year or didn't switch teams in the second year. And you'll notice that pretty much all of those correlations hover right around 0.4 year to year, which is comparable to other other offensive and pitching metrics. But the one that doesn't is positioning for players who switch teams. And so that's about half, the correlation is about half as strong as everything else, which kind of led us to the approach to count positioning as a team effect rather than an individual fielder effect. So what that leads to is what I talked about before, the range and positioning run saved component being replaced with part. What it's actually being replaced with is art run saved, where air, range, and throwing is now what goes into a player's total. And then positioning is instead a team-centric stat because of the fact that it's so team-controlled. So now I'm going to let Mark kind of give you some examples of how the system's actually working.
So one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to show what this looks like in the real world. Now, some of the plays, and you're going to see some of them, there's going to be almost no difference between the amount of value we were giving to a player beforehand and what we were giving to them now, but we'll contrast those among some other plays that we have that do show a difference, and we'll see what this looks like in defensive shifts, which was something that we weren't able to track before. And we wanted to just show very basic things like what does good range look like or what does good throwing look like, because we now have the ability to show all of those components to people. We can tell you that this guy is excellent at getting to the ball. We can tell you that this guy is excellent or poor at completing the play. So a very basic example would be Andrelton Simmons. This is a play that you would figure he makes quite often, but not everybody else does. Tough ground ball up the middle, goes in to make the play. And in our previous system, he would have been credited with 0.86 play saved, which then gets converted into a run value. In our new system, we can break that down. There's a slight loss of team credit for his defensive positioning because he had to go range a bit to make the play. He did range. He gets credit for that. He gets a small throwing credit, but the bulk of the credit for this play is because of what he did to come over the middle to make the play. And as a result, he's now getting 0.91 plays saved. So it's a small difference. But again, the point being here that we can illustrate where the value comes from. And in this case, the value comes from range. So what does bad range look like? We use someone that was on the other end of the spectrum in terms of defensive run saved. That's shortstop Ahmed Rosario. That's a routine kicked ground ball. See that happen sometimes. And in Rosario's case, it happened a decent amount last year, particularly in the early part of the season. In our previous system, that play was a near lock. That was he lost 0.96 of credit, meaning that play is churned into an out 96% of the time. Similarly, in our system, small loss of credit for positioning, similar credit for range. The art value is negative 0.94, so essentially the same. But again, he loses the credit in his range component as opposed to his throwing component. In terms of what good throwing looks like, we'll use Matt Chapman as an example. This is a play that has a few different parts to it. He's playing the line. He's able to get to that ball, which a lot of people aren't able to get to. In our previous system, he would have gotten 0.98 plays saved because that's a play that's turned into an out only 2% of the time. In our new system, he loses a little bit of credit. He only gets 0.78, but let's explain why. He was positioned in a way that allowed him to get to the ball. So the team is getting credit for putting him in that spot down the line and the ability to make that play. Then he gets a small chunk of credit for range because he was able to get to the ball from where he was standing. And the bulk of the credit, 0.53, is a pretty good value for throwing that we don't typically see in our system. That was a heck of a throw to get the runner at first base. And we track this. You can find this publicly in a number of different places. Baseball Reference, just mentioned. Congratulations, Sean. Baseball Reference is one. Fangraphs is another. And then we go a little bit more detailed on our website, fieldingbible.com, where you can see breakdowns such as how he fared on balls hit to his right, straight on, and to his left. And then you can see how many runs of value he saved, shift or no shift, balls in the air, range credit, and throwing credit. And you can see Matt Chapman has a pretty good run of success here, ranking first in each of the last 3 seasons. What does bad throwing look like? This is Jorge Polanco of the Twins. Pulls the first baseman off the bag. Polanco didn't have great throwing numbers. That was why we picked him as an example. In our previous system, negative 0.92 plays saved. You're not going to see much of a difference here. It's going to be the same. It's just we're able to show you now where the credit goes, and he's losing 0.92 plays saved of credit for throwing. And 0.89 overall. They did give him a little bit of credit, just a smidge, for getting to that ball.
So those were examples of good range and throwing, which are credited to the fielder, as I mentioned before. Positioning, which is the third part of the component breakdown, is not included in the player DRS totals because, as we said before, it's more of a team coaching, more decision rather than a player decision. Even though players kind of move around a few feet, given their own experience and whatnot, teams are the ones moving them halfway across the field, and we know that that's it's a little more significant. So it's like, again, positioning goes to the team, range and throwing go to the player. And so positioning is, we do track it, we do record it, and it still applies to a team's total runs saved in the form of infield positioning runs saved, which we split even further into shift and non-shift plays. So what the shift portion of that is what now makes up our shift run save metric, which for those who are unfamiliar, used to just be the team was shifted, they were expected to make the play this often, and then they made the play or didn't make the play. So we would give them credit based on that. But of course, that, in addition to depending on positioning, that kind of system also depends on individual fielder skill. So if the second baseman makes a diving play when he was in a shift to get the out, really it wasn't the shift that got the out, it was the player that got the out. But now, of course, we're splitting up positioning and range. So we know that shift run saved is now solely based on positioning. We know a team increase or decrease their chances of making a play by a certain amount because of their positioning. So that's what shift run saved is now represented by. So I'll let Mark show you some examples of good and bad positioning.
So this is where you're going to see a little bit of difference between our old system and our new system. And Adam Frazier of the Pirates is a good example of this. And he was someone who in our old system actually had a 5 or 6 run save total, and he wound up losing a chunk of that because it was discovered from this methodology. But a lot of the reason that he was making plays was because he was well positioned. Line drive hit right at him. In our previous system, he's getting 0.48 plays saved of credit there, even though essentially all he did was stand there and raise the glove. And I'm not disputing that doesn't require skill, but by our system, that credit is now going to the team rather than to him. That is essentially an 100% ball out by our standards. The team gets the credit for putting him in the spot to make the play, and he, as on a lot of routine plays, he gets no credit. What does bad positioning look like? And this isn't the fault of D. Gordon at all. Ground ball in the hole. Gordon was playing over a little towards second base, but not shifted. In our previous system, he was being penalized nearly 0.4 of a point in terms of plays saved. We were treating that as if 38% of players were turning that ball into an out, second baseman. That seems kind of unfair given where he was playing. And in fact, in the part system, they take away almost all of the credit and they give that to the team for putting him in that spot closer toward second base because essentially he had no shot at the ball. They give him a negative 0.04 because in terms of the buckets that we use, there are situations where things are on the edge of those buckets that players were able to get to a ball similar to that. And that's why Gordon loses a little, but that's a very small loss compared to what it was before.
So everything we've kind of talked about, or at least all the depth we've gone into so far, has been on non-shift plays and how the numbers are changing from the old system to the new system. Now we're going to kind of get into the new part of it where we're now tracking more plays because we have the ability to know where fielders are on each given play. So I kind of mentioned at the beginning that previously DRS did not include plays where there was a shift. I didn't really explain why. I'll do that here. Back in 2012, there was what we called the Laurie problem. And so Brett Laurie, who was a third baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays, would often be positioned in short right field in a shift, which is a little more common nowadays to see. But back then, he was pretty much the only third baseman doing that. And consequently, he was making outs on balls hit into short right field that no other third baseman could possibly make. So he was receiving inordinate amounts of credit when really the plays were easy for him. So at that point, back in 2012, BIS made the decision to exclude all shift plays from player DRS calculations and instead calculate a separate shift run saved component assigned to the team. Of course, the following year, in 2013, BIS started tracking where infielders were started on the play because of this problem. We wanted to get that granularity, and I said, now we have that data back through 2013. But back, of course, in 2012, when this problem first showed itself, the decision to exclude shift plays wasn't really as much of a problem, given that, as you can see in the chart, about 5% of balls in play featured a shift by the defense. Of course, as we all know, shift usage has kind of exploded since then. According to BIS tracking, the number has crossed 40% last year in 2019. More than nearly half of all balls in play last year featured a shift by BIS charting, which is kind of insane. And the fact that we were excluding so many plays from the calculation was not really okay anymore. It's just as okay as it was in 2012. So obviously we need to do something about that. So like I said, now we have this new part system, which because we know where each fielder started on the play, we're able to include those plays and just separate out the positioning and range parts of it. And shift plays, as I mentioned, range and throwing components on shift plays are now assigned to the fielder. Positioning is still separate, still assigned to the team as part of shift run saved. So again, I'll let Mark kind of kind of explain this a little better than I can.
All right, so what does good shift positioning look like? Here's one for Adam Frazier again. It's basically placed perfect there. It's a ground ball that's hit right to him in a defensive shift. Previous system did not evaluate the play for Frazier. In the new system, he gets a small credit because he does have to complete the play, but the bulk of the credit for that goes to positioning. And what we're trying to do here is kind of give you a peek under the hood, I guess, for how defensive run save works, and how we I guess come to do what we do in terms of defensive evaluation. What does bad shift positioning look like? I think we all know this when we see it. This is kind of an obvious one. Hitter goes oppo when the team puts the shift on, essentially a failed shift. In our previous version of the system, play wasn't evaluated for the player. Here it is, but he gets no loss of anything on it because that one's on the team for putting him in the defensive shift, and they lose a 0.8 for that. Now, I guess you could say whether or not the blame goes to, if the blame goes to the pitcher for not executing his spot there, or if something else happened, you could divvy up the blame that way. But this is how we are handling it. Now, getting back to the Laurie problem, how do you handle the third baseman when he's positioned in shallow right field? We mentioned that with Brett Laurie in the past, that was problematic. Here's Johan Camargo, Braves third baseman, playing in shallow right field to make the play. Play was not previously evaluated for him. Now he gets a small amount of credit, and the defense gets credit. The team gets credit for putting him in shallow right field. All of these are plays saved, as I mentioned before. They're later converted to a run save total, which is what you get when it's part of what goes into the full-fledged version of defensive run save.
So here's where it gets a little confusing. So we're not going to get too deep into it, but we did want to talk a little bit about the way we handle fielder overlap, and specifically on shifted plays. So on unshifted plays, we actually kept the methodology for DRS very similar to the way we formerly did it, except for the fact that we split up the components. So if you were to find a player's new art run saved on a play and add back in positioning, it would be the same. It would be very close to the same number that it used to be. On shifts, the methodology is kind of completely different because we wanted to handle this problem of fielder overlap more appropriately. And that problem is obviously if you see this kind of play, this example, ball hit to the right side of the field, it's more than likely that at least two fielders are going to have a chance to field the play, to field the ball. And the way the old system handles it isn't really optimal. So we wanted to improve that. And we know that, for example, the ball can get by one player and still be fielded by a player behind him. And now pretty much in every other system, all that would happen is that the deeper fielder would receive some credit. But in this new part system, we're able to kind of granularize that and debit one fielder while crediting another. So as I said, that's the first bullet on this slide. Don't need to repeat myself. But we have this ability to debit and credit multiple fielders on the same play, which is not something I think that other systems do. And obviously this is somewhat dangerous, given the fact that oftentimes players will defer to another, something like that, or there's any kind of crazy situations that happen on a play. So we are expecting to do, or we're doing more research on this in the near future because it's something that we're interested in as well. But for the moment, right now it's pretty much the fact that if the ball gets by a shallower fielder, we're going to debit him while we credit the fielder behind him.
And here's where it works. In a play like this, with the White Sox shortstop, Tim Anderson, and the third baseman, Yoan Moncada. Watch how the play develops. Moncada went for the ball, couldn't get it. Anderson went for the ball too. He did get it. He made a terrific throw to first base to complete the play. In the previous version of the system, neither player was evaluated because it turned out the White Sox were in a shift there. But in the new version, you will see that, and we'll start with Moncada. Moncada, team loses credit for positioning him in a way that hindered his ability to get to the ball. He loses credit for range because he was unable to get to the ball, a ball that about half of third basemen should be able to get to. He did not. So in the end, he comes out negative for that. Tim Anderson comes out positive, not for range, but for the throw that he made to get the runner at first base. That was a terrific play on his part. He gets credit. Moncada gets debited a little bit. His defensive run save takes a small hit. Anderson's will get a little bit of a boost. And that's how the system works for a play of this type. So we look at whose defensive run save changed the most. Now, if you're someone that goes to Fangraphs or Baseball Reference and checks defensive run save every so often for stats, if you did it within the past week or two, you might have noticed something different from what was there at the end of the season. We've updated everything, and they updated everything to include all of this new data that we have and all the systems that we've changed. And you can see that in a lot of cases, it's a case of the best getting better. Chapman's defensive run save nearly doubled. Baez's run save went up. Arenado's run save went up considerably. Paul DeYoung, he's probably someone that you wouldn't necessarily have expected to be there, but as it turned out, he was pretty good at what I would call the shuffle to your left and make the play. And there was a lot of that the Cardinals had last season, and he did very well in that. Miguel Rojas is someone that didn't do well by the system. And the common thread between these five guys is that when their team shifted, they excelled. All of these guys had good defensive run save numbers enhanced by their performance in the shift, except for Rojas, whose numbers declined because he wasn't making plays in the shift that our system felt that he should have been making. Whoops. Which team had the best positioning? So I thought this was kind of interesting. Here are the teams that got the most credit from our system for infield positioning runs saved. And Tampa Bay was at the top. The Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, the White Sox, and the Blue Jays. These teams shift a lot, and they got a lot of their value from defensive shifts. The Rays actually got a good chunk of value outside of defensive shifts, too. Their system of positioning appears to be very precise and very specific. I had done a story for The Athletic about the way that they play defense, and they kind of hinted at that without giving up the full picture on that. But it worked for them last season. It helped them on their way to a playoff spot. If you're looking to learn more about the things that we have, you can go to our blog, you can go to our podcast, you can go to our Twitter, you can go to our Instagram, and you can check out fieldingbible.com and our weekly newsletter, Stat of the Week, as well as our book, The Fielding Bible, Volume 5, which is available now. You saw the cover. It was the first slide that we did. We'd like to thank some people for helping us out. John DeWant is the owner of the company. He's the founder of Stats Inc. as well, and he is the one who set everything in motion for us. Baseball Info Solutions Video Scouts do the work of logging every pitch and every moment of every game, both for baseball, and we have a group that does it for football as well. The R&D team consists of myself and Brian, but a number of others as well. We just had a member that got hired away by the Cincinnati Reds, Andrew Kine. Congratulations to him. The R&D team has done a lot of work on this over the last few years. And lastly, we'd like to thank SABR for allowing us to present. And I apologize for the technical glitches that may have hindered this a little bit. Thank you.